moving back into Photoshop, we're going to do our paint over of our creatures. I've captured the rock rubber at several different angles. I decided to do a close-up render as well, and I captured the same materials. I have the specular pass, where the rock rubber looks very wet. I have the slightly drier pass. I have the mask rendered out so that I can easily separate the creature from the environment, and I also rendered out a black velvet pass so that I can use this to help describe the creature using rim lighting. So what we're going to do, we're going to use this one as our base, and by using the arrow key and holding down Shift, I can drag one layer directly on top of the other. One layer directly on top of the other, one layer directly on top of the other. So this lines up really nicely. I can now take what I want from each individual layer and apply it to the image. So the first thing is reducing the matte quality. Also in this render I accidentally got some of the rock, which I want to get rid of. I'm going to be working with masks. You can apply a mask right here. By painting the area black, making sure that the mask section is highlighted, I can erase away parts of the image without really erasing it. I'm just doing this in the mask. The image itself is not being destroyed at all. At this point, I want to pick what areas of the creature that I'd like to have a higher level of specularity, chip away at the mask wherever I want, cutting away this top matte layer and revealing the higher specular material render under my matte layer. I'm just going around and picking what I want to pop. Here is my rim light layer, and just by working with a screen or lighten layer, you can see that everything that's black goes away. So it's really important to know what these layers actually do in Photoshop so that you can very quickly enhance your image. So if we go to lighten, you can see all the black has gone away and it's just revealed these highlights. That's all we have left. If we go to screen, you can see it lightens up the whole image a bit more than just lighten. With this, we can highlight areas that fall into shadow. You can see the gullet under here is now accented by the rim light layer on the lighten layer, and it's revealing areas of the design that would be hidden otherwise. Now I can use my mask and I can quickly get rid of areas that don't make any sense. And so learning how to edit these renders can save you quite a bit of time. So I already completed this image, so we're going to put this off to the side, and I'm going to walk you through what I've done. So here he is, my completed rock rubber. So you can see that I've enhanced the lighting quite a bit. I've added a bit of texture, some atmosphere. Now because we're dealing with just a close-up of the creature, I don't want to deal with an environment right now. If this creature was being revealed in a scene in the film, and he took up this much of the space, the background would be very diffused anyways. So let's look at how we got here. So as you can see, we started with the basic material. I applied the more matte version of the rock rubber on top of itself, and I erased away. Same thing with the highlights. Now in this instance, I did something a little different. I took my fabric velvet layer and I bumped up the contrast. So here's what it originally looked like up here. By going into my brightness contrast, image, adjustments, brightness contrast, I was able to crush the values even more. And so you can do that with your rim light layer slash velvet render. and put that on a lighten layer to minimize the rim light effect. Now, as I'm doing this, I'll always keep a copy of the original layer right up here, just so I can go back to it if I don't like what I've adjusted. At this point now, I'm using the mask to isolate sections of the design just by selecting the red with the magic wand. I can then create a mask that perfectly fits the rock rubber just by hitting the mask button. And you can see that I've isolated him from the environment. So I can always select from my mask layer to isolate the character from the environment, the eyes from the rest of the character, whatever I want to do. With the mask on, I was able to paint out some smoke in the environment. So you can see if I were to disable the layer mask, it's just an airbrush. That's all I did. Painting in some grays for the atmosphere. Let's enable that mask. And then, of course, I'm able to paint everywhere on the image without running the risk of getting into the character. Here I'm adding a little bit of some spray, and you can see I have some nice custom brushes here that I've collected, some that I've created over the years, and this just helps to break it up. Maybe there's some particulates in the air. Now we can take the time to actually enhance the lighting a bit by using curves. If there are areas of the design that are falling into shadow, I will often just select the areas that I want to illuminate, of course keeping in mind where my light source is. So I'll start with a selection, and you can decide how much contrast you want, how much black, how much white. And as you can see, it's created a mask. So every area where I paint white, I will be applying the effect of the curves layer. So I'm just going to use a soft brush again, and I can add highlights this way. Now, curves are utilized quite a bit in matte painting, and so it's a wonderful way to just adjust your lighting on a separate layer without worrying about damaging the image. And you can try a few different things out. If you don't like what you've done, you can go back to black, and you can use black to reapply the mask. So you may have noticed that my initial renders were a bit dark, but knowing what I know about Photoshop, I knew I could enhance them once I brought them into the program. So that's all I essentially did with the curves. It's not quite as bright as what I just demoed. So at this stage, now I'm going in and I'm trying to enhance the character in a few ways. So I just took a brush and I started to select values, colors in the image, and I started to push the hair a bit. And here I'm actually starting to paint in the saliva of the character. Now, there's going to be a little bit of blur on this guy because you have to imagine where we are in relationship to the rock rubber. From this distance, we're pretty close up. And if you look at a lot of nature photography, you'll notice that when they get very close up on animals, things that are furthest away from the eye tend to diffuse and blur, or there might be a motion blur. And so I'm painting these fairly aggressively, knowing that I'm going to blur them out and soften them. So applying a blur, I'm going to duplicate the layer. For a Mac, you can hit Command-Option-Shift-E, and you can see I now have a flat layer of everything that I can see in the picture plane. We can go under our filters, and we can go to blur, and for this guy, I want there to be a little bit of motion blur to him. So I'm going to go to the motion blur, and you can see it's already affecting him quite a bit. I want to put the angle of the blur in the direction that the creature is going. I imagine he's kind of lunging forward slightly, and I can adjust this quite a bit. So because this is on a duplicated layer. I can now erase away the areas that I want in focus, the areas that are closest to me. So it adds a really interesting cinematic effect. So you can see there's quite a bit of adjustment. Here I'm coming in, I'm painting areas opaquely. Here I decided to blur the arm that's furthest away from us a little bit more. And you'll also notice that I diffused the value of the arm that's furthest away from us. After painting in all of this atmosphere, I imagine that there might be a little bit of atmospheric perspective pushing that arm back. I've also added it to the back leg, and it helps to separate the planes in your image. So coming in here, I'm zooming in, and I'm just painting opaquely. Painting in highlights, elements of the design that are hidden by the lighting. I can just go in with a soft brush. When it comes to working with a render, I'm going to use a very soft brush with low flow. And that will help me blend these elements. Now, every color I need is currently on the image. So, all I have to do is use my eyedropper, select the color, the value that I need, and start to paint with it. I can use highlights to enhance areas of the design that have fallen off. And the wonderful thing about working with these renders, it trains your eye. It's almost as if you're a matte painter and this is a plate that you have to extend. The rules for the image are all here. You already know what the lighting is doing, you already know what the colors are doing. You just have to work within that image and enhance it. I mean, we spent so much time sculpting and polypainting this creature, there shouldn't be much to do, really, in Photoshop at this point. I'm going to use a texture to break up the airbrush quality of the work, and I'm going to apply that on a soft light layer. So here's a texture that I found online. It's a photo, an old wall. It's like old concrete and brick, and it has a wonderful organic quality to it. So I'm just going to drag that onto the surface of my image, and I'm going to apply it as a soft light layer. So you can see that in a soft light layer, any area where there's a highlight, it's really starting to show up. And so by lowering the opacity, it just adds a little bit of noise to the image, keeps it from looking too digital, too sterile, and it adds a little bit of grit to the image. So here it is right here. I've applied it, and I started to paint a few areas opaquely, just enhancing it. You can see that I'm adding more saliva, I'm adding more little hairs, little quills on him. So now I want the image to have a more dramatic quality to it, and I want to adjust my colors a bit and get the overall image to pop. So I'm going to use my levels to do that. Using the levels is an interesting process. You can add color and adjust contrast with them, just like with curves, but it's a little bit different. And I find it more random, probably because I don't really understand how to use levels the right way. So let's go into levels. Here's my levels palette. And by using the eyedropper, we can define areas. We're telling Photoshop, okay, I want this to be my highlight. I want this to be the brightest bright. And as soon as I do that, you'll notice that the entire image adjusts to it, but it also changes the colors a bit. So if I were to say, with the darkest eyedropper, I was, alright, I want that to be my black of the image. And suddenly, we get all of these really interesting effects that crush the values. And so sometimes I'll just work with the levels just to come up with a few different options with lighting. So I was playing with just the happy accidents that I get from the levels to this adjustment. You'll notice that it is a bit more severe than what I have here at 100%. That's what it looks like. I dialed it all the way down to 32% to get this effect, and it's very subtle. It feels really natural. Just like with everything else in Photoshop and in ZBrush, I will work aggressively and then soften it or lower the opacity. So even at this stage, just adding a little bit more paint here and there, adjusting the lighting. Here I thought that this value was competing with the mandibles, so I just added some adjustment in my curves, push that back. I'm adding a little bit more of my velvet layer. Let's see what that looks like. And at this point, I changed the color of the layer so that it was more in line with the illustration. So you can see here, I turn the color of my rim light layer into a yellow hue. Just by going to Control B, Command B, you can adjust the color balance very quickly with these sliders. And if your palette changes, you can add reds, you can add yellows, pinks, whatever you need to change the color of your light source, of your highlight source. Another little thing I like to do is to add a little bit of noise to the final image. And so you'll notice here is that through the gradients, through the atmosphere, I added a slight noise filter, and you can see some noise in the image, and I like that because it gives the image an all-over consistent texture. When you start off with a render and you alter it, it's important that by the time you're done, it doesn't look like an altered image. And so by adding noise to the overall image, it has this consistency through and through. So in order to achieve that, that's also under Filter. So I'm going to go Shift Command Option E, and that gives me another copy. Filter, let's go to Noise, Add Noise, and I don't like to go too high, I'll usually go to just 2, but as you can see, it can be applied very heavily if you want, but I only go into it at about 2%, and that's enough to get the idea across. I also added just a few highlights under the jaw to help separate it. I adjusted some of the curves again. I wanted to lighten the detail in the head. And with opaque paint, I just decided to accent a few areas of the concept to highlight the tip of the mandible here, catch some detail in here, and also add a slight striation, a muscle striation to the top of the forearm right there. So that's how we got here. So let's do a little before and after. Here's the original image and the enhanced. So there is quite a bit of work being done here, but the all-over image is still fairly the same. I'm just enhancing lighting for the most part. That is it.